Hi guys, welcome to my channel. My name is Mr. Sulkowski. I teach AP European History and AP World History. What I'm going to be covering is part 4 of my AP European History Quarter 1 PowerPoint. So what it is just basically the biggest things for the first quarter that I teach the course, that you can kind of pick and choose stuff that you need to know, and big things to cover. I edited a lot of the stuff that I did, so basically I compiled all my PowerPoints into one ginormous PowerPoint, and I edited out the slides that I thought were most important, that come up most to know most of European history. Now, it's not a catch-all that you study these and you're not going to see other stuff on the test or whatever, but it's a good kind of like run through of all the major concepts. The last section I covered in this PowerPoint was basically the age of absolutism, the absolute monarchs, and then what this last section is going to be about the age of Enlightenment. And this kind of falls into the line of what natural philosophy is, the scientific revolution, and how they kind of stem into two. So there's the scientific revolution and then the Enlightenment, but they're kind of going hand in hand. Scientific revolution is basically based on reason, applying it to nature, and the Enlightenment will basically be the idea of new ideas applied to society, governance, and like economies and stuff like that. But they're intertwined in our world today, and it's just basically where we kind of come from this point in history. Again, if you like the channel, like, subscribe. I'll be putting videos up every so often, probably like every week. That's what I'm shooting at. Reviews, generally speaking, at first, and then I'll be going into more in-depth reviews as we go. So this section talks about the scientific revolution, science using reason to apply to anyone. Some of the big AP or AP exam names that I know you need to know. I mean, you're not going to see it, maybe you're going to see it. Will be Copernicus. Basically, he's the idea of the heaven of revolutionary heavenly spheres. Basically, with Copernicus breaking down the model of the idea that basically the world is not the center of the universe. Okay, that's important because basically before this, humanity, solely based on the Catholic teaching, was that the church was the center of the universe through the idea that man was the center of the universe. So it's like an egotistical way of seeing humanity on earth. Through his groundbreaking work, he's basically saying that we are part of a bigger thing. Thus, humanity and human beings will not be the biggest part in the universe. So it's kind of like an ego hit to us, and it kind of like upends everything in history from that period of time. So it basically breaks open the outside world of the world, right? Like the sun, the universe, all the other stuff that kind of goes along. So it's one of those ones that you need to think about going forward. The next one will be Copernicus. He adds to this model. He says that the way that the planets kind of circle around the sun is not in a perfect circle, but it's in these orbitals, like kind of like an oval shape. So that's important because the closer you get to the sun, the faster it goes. The further away you get from the sun, the slower it goes because of gravity. So it's not like these perfect geometric circles, right? So it really just starts to expand our ideas of the universe. Galileo is important because he basically creates the idea of inertia, the idea that an object is in motion until an external force is applied to it. And basically this is important because things are not just moving because somebody needs to be acting on it. And this is also applied to the idea of gravity, of, you think of the Big Bang. It's important for us to realize this in our scientific understanding of the world. And it's called, at first off, the scientific revolution is called natural science. It's stuff that we start to observe in the real world. And this comes to the scientific revolution, where we start to apply reason to everything we see in the world. Newton is important for his ideas, the mathematical principles of natural philosophy, the idea of gravity, the idea of applying mathematics to the world to understand it. I sound like a math teacher all the time I say this, but basically you can dissect the whole world into mathematics. Mathematics is the language of the universe. If the universe has one language, it'll be math, and then through that principle you can understand the world through mathematics. You don't have to speak different types of languages, and through that understanding basically opens up the world to study everything that we see around us, from little to small to big. Anything through mathematics is important. So the idea of math applied to natural principles is essential for humanity to step forward for the rest of the universe. Methods of science were basically dissected through these two big philosophies, philosophical people that you need to know, which would be Bacon, Francis Bacon, or Rene Descartes. Now, Bacon was more about the experimental method, and he basically focused on the ideas of empirical research. So that's the one you need to know for Bacon. Basically, that's what we use today for the idea of you do an experiment and then you come up with an outcome. You record your data and then you build on that like an empire, empirical research. The more you build on it, the more you can understand that data. And through that data, you either see if your hypothesis is correct and you understand what's going on through the compilation of data, right? So it's basically what you think of today of basic science. Empiricism is basically, think of an empire. The more you build up on it, the more you can understand that subject idea and so forth. Descartes was basically more about the idea of like matter and mind, and he kind of theorized by this, kind of continued the idea of an autonomous from the Greeks, thinking of tiny particles. And he's very important because he comes up with the idea of like a Cartesian dualism, the idea of like what really exists, questioning your am I flawed in the way I'm seeing things and interpreting it? What is the truth of essence and so forth? He's important because through mathematics, he basically says that the world is basically can express itself to being the actual core of it, and he comes up and pushes the theory that the world that we think of is like broken down to tiny particles. He's a continuation of an ancient Greek philosopher who posed this kind of idea. And he says that the idea is that we basically work like a machine through the ideas of thinking. And it's important because it's like a systematic approach to the world, meaning we're a system, we're people, but we're part of we're individually, we're one person, but together we work part of a society, like a bigger system. That society works in a bigger system of the nation, that nation is part of a section of the world is part of the section of the universe, and so forth. So it's all systematic approaches. Individually, I'm made up of systems of organs and heart and lungs and all the same thing, blood and bones and all that stuff. So together I make a system inside. Inside cells going smaller, they're systems. So everything is systematically approached as a machine and mechanisms of understanding that, which is really like important concept to understand the world and push science and mathematics into the next realm. You have Spinoza. Spinoza was basically the idea of applying the idea of breaking down older traditions. He basically stated that merges God and nature, and he's important because he basically he states that God's everywhere, kind of like the philosophy. He's not saying that God is omnipotent, meaning God is all powerful, but God is also everywhere we see. It's not just a guy sitting in a throne up in the clouds and just kind of watches us. Like God is in the birds and bees and flowers and trees, right, like a song. But that's basically the ideas of how he kind of breaks down this older tradition and basically adapts the idea of natural philosophy into human society. So that's kind of a very big leap going forward for Spinoza. You have John Locke. Locke's essay on human understanding through experience. So he's kind of like the idea that your world basically forms you, and through that idea, through your senses, you're basically formed through the impression. So you are only basically impressions of your environment, and that's what made you, right? It's a very interesting way of thinking about it, but through sensationalism and senses, that's basically the best way to understand your world. Again, in the Enlightenment, they're basically trying to figure out deeper ideas of their world, and it's implying every kind of aspect you can imagine, from science to math to your mind to governance to God to currency. Anything you can think of is basically being broken down and having reason and deep thought applied to it to go further with your mind, not just to accept it on face value. And this is where you also start seeing a major shift, because these ideas are really starting to contradict the traditional institutions that are centralized in Europe at the time, which would be the Catholic Church. And it's starting to really fracture the ideas of the Catholic Church's teachings and scientific understanding. That's where you start seeing them separate. But together they were once one and the same. But they slowly start to like friction and break apart during this period of time, which is the 1700s. It's important to understand that. Again, if you like the channel, like and subscribe. Hopefully this gives you a better understanding and kind of pointing out some big names to know and big ideas here. You wouldn't be actually technically the essays concerning human understandings, but you'd be the idea of like sensationalism, one of the outside thinking of it, of John Locke. That's why I always kind of go to the major point of it. Montesquieu's ideas are basically important because it's about government, how to balance government. Through his Parisian letters, basically through these practices of two Parisian letters, these Parisians talking, he basically comes up with the understanding that the balance of power and government is basically the most important thing. And he does it through the critique. He's two Parisians, people from Paris, critique a government and rulers, and the best way to do it is basically he comes up with the outcome of balancing the tyrants in society. He does it through a third party because he doesn't want to probably lose his life. But he's important because Montesquieu is the quintessential idea of the balance of government, the three powers that are involved in the American government today, which is the executive, judicial, and legislative. That is a quintessential Montesquieu idea, which is implemented as an American citizen into the ideas of going forward for that. So it's critical because that's one of the things the founding fathers employ. Francis Marie Trois was basically known as Voltaire, and he is basically known as like the pen is mightier than the sword. He wrote letters all over critiquing all the assets of society. He is basically, if someone's going to be critiquing, he even wrote to Catherine the Great of inspiring her to be an enlightened empress, writing about corruptions everywhere he went, and the idea is to improve society through eliminating corrupt behaviors. So he's basically like, the pen is mightier than the sword is the best way to explain Voltaire, and you would see him in more of the writings of critiquing people and not having, like, standing up to him. Diderot is important because he creates the first version of the encyclopedia. Encyclopedia is basically before you kids were born, was basically the idea of Google search. He made like the first Google search. There's an album of encyclopedia, like Wikipedia. You look it up, you find your stuff, find the history, bio, and all that stuff. It's like that version of it. So you need to know that the encyclopedia is Diderot. Okay, Dennis Diderot. That's one of those ones you would probably get just a specific idea of. Here, Adam Smith again, the Wealth of Nations. Basically, Adam Smith poses with his Wealth of Nations, which is the most probably important one here, because you're not going to just see it in the Enlightenment, but you're going to see it throughout European history and the world today. His idea through the Wealth of Nations, he says, through a free market system that is no longer controlled by an absolute monarch ruling over every aspect of society, ultimately the best of the best will come to the surface through free competition. Meaning, if you let people make things and supply things and demand, and you let that go freely, the free market laws of fair economics, the best will rise to the top. The best way I can illustrate it is that if there's someone making, for instance, computers during this period of time before Adam Smith, they're just going to make one model, they're going to sell it for one price, and it's going to be the same model for 500 years. There's no reason to change it. It's just going to be a $50 computer that you're going to buy, and that's the only computer you can get because there's no other one. The monarch told you to make it, and that's it. But if you let another computer company come out through their competition, that other computer company will be like, well, I'll make mine faster with more, RAM and put cameras on it and all this other stuff. That other older company is not just going to sit there with its $50 computer that's 500 years old with its model. It's going to improve it, right? It's going to improve it, it's make it better, faster, more RAM, more memory, all that jazz, right? Bigger screen, HD, all that kind of stuff. The other one's going to go, oh, well, I'm going to step you up, right? And then they're going to make their computer better. So this one's going to say, well, I can't make my computer better. Well, you know what I can do? I can figure out a way to lower the price. So I'll make it $40. Same thing with this one, $40, right? So through this competition, who end up really winning, is really the winner, is the consumer. Because you guys, at the end of the day, will get the best computer with the best type of features for the best price. And that is ultimately his idea through the free market system, which is true in its essence and core idea, that ultimately the consumer and society will win out having the best product, the best features, safety, RAM, all that stuff for the best price, because through competition, these things emerge. Women in the Enlightenment, you have Mary Estelle, a series of proposed to ladies. The idea is that basically women were also fighting for equality. You have Madame de Dufon. She was basically from the Salons. She's important because Salons were basically the forums to talk during this time about Enlightenment thought. So you wouldn't necessarily be talking about these things freely in the streets because you'll lose your life. But these salons where women were holding these parties, these soirees, were very important because they became the place to talk freely about the Enlightenment, spreading it throughout France. And that's one of the ones you would get as an idea of where they were facilitating, because you're not going to be able to talk this stuff with your friend on the street. You don't know who was working for the man, right? And even Benjamin Franklin was very famous in joining one of these, not participating in these salons, and he actually had such guests as Montesquieu's, but Benjamin Franklin and Madame Dufon's basic salon. So that's really important because that facilitates even the American Revolution's the ideas. Remember, I love to say about the founding fathers. They were really smart, but they didn't come up with everything from scratch. They grabbed pieces from all over, from the government of England, from the ideas of the Enlightenment, and they kind of put it in together to become what you think of the American dream, the American government. It's not something that they just come up with all this stuff from scratch. During the Enlightenment, you have a new artistic style called Rococo. This is important to think of the type of kind of more refined artistic movement. Rococo comes around. It's more refined. The idea here, you can think of it as more of gold, kind of flaked with a background pastel kind of color. It won't be so gaudy in the ideas of Renaissance art, but basically, or Renaissance style. I have a review for images on this, so I go through all the images and then how they change over, or artistic styles or whatever. I kind of do an image one of that. But this is one of the ones you would need to know. I do like a little quick crash course on images, so you want to check that one out if you go there. Now, enlightened absolutist monarchs, meaning absolute monarchs, actually participate in the ideas of enlightenment, and they apply it to their actual country. So you're going to get a couple of them popping up. You're going to get Maria Theresa. She's basically, you're going to get Frederick the Second. Basically, he's important because he's one of the first ones to kind of come up in this age. As if Maria Theresa is important from Austria. She's one of those people that you want to know coming up. And then major APE concept here is the 7 Years' War. So you would have the biggest ones you would have would be Catherine the Great would be the best one to say is an enlightened one. The best example of an enlightened empress you would see would be Catherine the Great of Russia, the formulation of education, and that was in part 3 of this review. So you would check her out if you want to know more about enlightened emperors. So basically, it's emperors with absolute monarchs, right? Absolute monarchs that are enlightened, so they apply these types of philosophies into their rule. The 7 Years' War is important. Going further, it's basically what it creates is humane policy. It's basically the fighting over territories going further. And Maria Theresa wanted to regain Silesia. Frederick II, Frederick II basically was pushing her out of the way. She's important. She's one of the strongest female rulers that wasn't Catherine the Great. The 7 Years' War continued. Going further, basically what it was basically fighting for the New World. It is kind of important, but it's not like a major one that you would get major details. The outcomes of it, we'll talk more about it in the next quarter 2 review. Why I kept this here, just so you can kind of get some more details of it. It's more of American history, fighting the territories in the New World. But what it does is it's kind of like edging out of people going further. Here again, Catherine the Great of Reform, she's the one that I want you to focus on because she's the one that you need to know is the Enlightened Empress, and Maria Theresa of the Austria and the Habsburg Empire. She wanted reform also, so those are one of the famous ones. Frederick the Great is also an important one of going further. Prussia, so you have Frederick the Great of Prussia. He didn't, let me see if I have him here. No, that's it. So I have Frederick the Great of Prussia will be an Enlightened Emperor. Him, right? Frederick the Great. He built things like inherited a great army, culture. He adapted culture. The biggest ones would be Catherine the Great, domestic reform to territorial expansion. She made culture. She's like the Renaissance version in Russia. She's important for that. And then you have Maria Theresa of the Habsburg Empire. She still initiated church reform, created a whole series of administrative innovations, and last, the government going forward. You're not going to get into many details. The ones that I would say the biggest ones to know for this course is know your Copernicuses, know your Keplers. Those are important. Know your John Locke. Know John Locke for sure. Know Montesquieu. Spinoza is one of those ones that's out there, but they ask a little bit. Adam Smith, that's the biggest one. If I were to say you need to burn one thing into your brain, because Adam Smith's economic system is not just created during this time. We're using it even today as we speak, right? The idea of free markets. So it's super important to get that under your belt, because not only just for understanding in case there's a multiple choice question, but the idea is you can apply it to pretty much any written question you need to, if you need to. Now, obviously, it can't be in everything, but it's adaptable very much. So, Adam Smith, Wealth of Nations, free market system, laws of fair economics. That'd be the biggest one, and know your earlier enlightened people going forward. The enlightened empresses would be Catherine the Great, and she westernizes Russia. She'd be the biggest name to know going forward. Well, if you like the video, like and subscribe. I know I didn't do the 7 Years' War justice, but frankly speaking, it's in another video and we'll cover it later, but I'd rather you focus on the enlightened side, absolutism from the one before, and the scientific revolution. Well, hope you liked it. Like and subscribe, and you can always get these and read them yourselves with the link below. Okay? Thank you.